Okay, good day. Welcome to my channel. Today we will be talking about research methodology. Research methodology is a big thing. There are different contents of research methodology, so I decided to just break it and have a series of lectures about the entire content of the research methodology. So in this lecture video, I will be focusing on the research design. But before we will expound what are the types of research designs, let me give you an idea on what are the contents of the research methodology in order. So I may give a short description also for you to be oriented as early as now. So first is the design. This is our main focus in this lecture video. So I will be talking less about this so that we will expound it after I will give all the components of the research methodology. So second is the flow. So this includes the input, includes the presentation of the input, so your variables, the problem that you want to address, and then now input, and then the process or the methodology, and then the output, which is based on the findings of your study. So next, the environment is where you conducted your study, or it's the locale of your study. So this is not applicable to discourse analytics, because discourse analytics can be done in your desk, so you don't need to specify the environment in your presentation of research methodology. So this is applicable to those who will be conducting surveys, interviews, like that. So for example, if you are having a survey in your own barangay, so you need to state the barangay and the the municipality. So in a separate page also, you need to include the map of your locale. Okay, so next, number 4 is the participants of your study. You call them respondents if they are people. So just like in your when you have survey and you gave them your survey questionnaires. So those who are answering your survey questionnaires are called respondents. So in historical research, when you try to interview, so those interviewee of yours are called informants. But if you are having a discourse analysis and you use the text from the poems, for example, of Robert Frost, then that text is called the subject. So participants is not applicable to discourse analytics. Okay, so number 5 is the instrumentation. In the presentation of your instrument, you need to present the construction, the composition, and the validity. So you need to present what is the composition of your instrument. Like part 1 is asking the profile of the respondents, while part 2 will measure their self-efficacy, so like that. And the validity also is you have to justify how valid your instrument is. So if it's adopted, so it is more valid. So like you will be adopting an instrument which is used by a published study. So that is called adopted instrument. ADOPTED. So when you say adopted, meaning you did not modify anything, you totally use the instrument being used by another researcher. So researcher, of course, of an accomplished research. So Adapted, meaning A, or which is spelled as ADAPTED, is an instrument where you modify something. You modified the instrument being used by another researcher. And you can also have a self-made questionnaire, especially in interviews. But again, you need to validate your instrument. And how to validate your instrument? You may consult experts of, of that certain field, like your advisor or anyone whom you think is an expert of that field of study of yours. And another way of validating your instrument is by having a pilot test. You try to distribute your survey questionnaires to a group of people and try to see if your instrument is readable by the people, or by the respondents, by the trial respondents. Okay, so that is my term for you to understand. And number 6 is data gathering procedure. So you have to present there the steps that you will do to gather your procedure. So of course, the first is you ask permission from the administration. For example, if you are conducting in a municipality, you can have a transmittal letter for your mayor. Or if you are conducting in your university, you can do, or you can make a transmittal letter for your university head or your campus director. So until you will distribute the questionnaires, and lastly, the retrieving of your questionnaire. So you have to describe from the first step to the retrieving, from the asking of permission to the administration to the retrieving of the questionnaires. So next is the statistical or data treatment. So you have to consult to your statistician regarding this, on what formula to be used in order to arrive at an appropriate or accurate result. So you often, or usually, you will get the mean, the z-test or the t-test. You will use the t-test if your respondents is less than 30. If your respondents is more than 30, you will use the z-test. And if you want to measure the variance, or when you say is there a significant difference, you have to use the ANOVA, or the analysis of variance formula. Okay, so I hope we can explore more on that in a separate lecture video. But if you really need an idea about this right now, so you better consult a statistician. So now I want to give you a hint on how to present your research methodology, content by content. So first you have to present, then second you have to define, and third you have to justify. For example, in your research design, you have to present what kind of research design this study will use: a quantitative, correlational design, so like that. Then define why you are using that kind of design, then justify why you choose that design. So in that sequence, you will be able to organize your methodology content by content. Okay, so how to choose your research design. So this is our main focus for this lecture video. So I know you are also interested to know more about the other contents, and hopefully we can have that in a separate lecture if you also wish. So how to choose your research design? Of course, first you need to have a basic understanding on the the different designs, or the definition or the description of different designs. So there are four types of design. So first is historical, second is descriptive, third is experimental, and fourth is case study. So when you say historical, it talks about the past, or it wants to measure, or it uses information of the past. When you say descriptive, it is focusing on the present situation. When you say experimental, it tries to predict what will happen in the future if I'll do this with that and that. So case study is a combination of historical, descriptive, and experimental, and it is not usually used in an undergraduate thesis because it is tedious. It will consume a longer time, and inferencing is hard because in case study, respondent or sampling is limited. Of course, there must be a limit in order for you to thoroughly examine the case. Okay, so let's venture on what is historical, what is descriptive, what is experimental, and what is case study. And I hope you are still listening. So first, historical research design. So it is a systematic and critical inquiry of the whole truth of past events. So using critical method in the understanding and the interpretation of facts which are applicable to current issues and problems. So you need to examine the past in order to solve a certain problem of the present. So there are two kinds of sources for historical design. First is the primary sources, and second is the secondary sources. So when you say primary sources, it refers to the documents and remains, like the memorandums of the past, so the legislative orders, executive orders. So when you also say secondary sources, it refers to the history, the bibliography, and the encyclopedia and other written sources. Okay, so there are three major steps for historical research design. First is the collection of data, second is the criticism of data, and third is the presentation of facts. So this is mainly to shed light about the present. So to shed lights on the vague situations or the problems of the present. So once the information of the past is being collected and being criticized, so a new gathered fact will be presented. So that presented fact may solve the problem which is faced in the present. Okay, so second kind of design is the descriptive design. So this study focuses at the present condition. The purpose is to find new truth. The truth may have different forms such as increased quantity of knowledge, a new generalization, or a new law. Because in modifying the research procedures or methodologies of research, a new information can be found. That's why there is a continuous urge to do research in order to find the gap or to find the missing piece. And when the missing piece or the missing information is added to the body of information, then that is the fruit of descriptive design. So that's why research is really very important in order for us to upgrade our knowledge every time. So let's not stick to the research of the ancient times. So for us also to be able to predict on what will happen in the future. So next I will give you an overview on the kinds of descriptive design. So I already mentioned this in my previous lecture video, and I won't attempt to give definitions of all these. I will just describe because this is self-explanatory. So descriptive surveys, when you do a survey for a certain situation or any, as long as you are doing a survey. So descriptive normative survey, when the results of your survey will be compared to a norm or a standard. So example, you are surveying on, or you are trying to describe a certain situation today, and you compare it to the standards of a certain agency. So that's descriptive normative survey. So next, descriptive status, or the status of, this is literally the status of a certain person, for example, socioeconomic status, or any present situation of the participants. Next is descriptive analysis, when you try to analyze the nature of something, the nature of the language of the respondents in different disciplines of linguistics, or any in any fields of research on nature. Just remember the word nature. So descriptive classification, when you try to classify, like you classify the lexical items uh, from this municipality to that municipality. And you also have descriptive evaluative, when you evaluate previous research. So you can see if it's still valid or not, or are are the facts well presented, are the results uh, still applicable today. So that's evaluative. Then descriptive comparative, when you compare two variables. And then correlational survey, when you try to see the relationship of this variable, independent and dependent variable. Then longitudinal study, when you do a research from linear, so from 1 year old to 5 years old. This is quite similar to case study. Okay, so with these kinds of descriptive designs, you will have an idea on what is descriptive design. So now let's go to experimental design, and I'm trying to focus on this because this is very saleable. So this kind of experiment is very saleable because the results of this really will give a numerical data mostly. So, but some kind of experimental designs is also applicable to qualitative research. So, but, but since this is an experiment, so this is quite interesting. So it is a problem solving approach that the study is described in the future on what will be when certain variables are carefully controlled and manipulated. So there are a lot of types of experimental design. So let's try to um, explore. So number one, so focus on this because I myself really love to know about the different types of experimental design. So this design involves a single treatment with two or more levels. So for example, the impact of phonic songs exposure to the toddlers of Lamacan, Argao, Cebu. So there is only one treatment. The treatment there is the phonic song exposure, and then respondents is the toddlers of Lamacan, Argao, Cebu. And it can also be In this case, the effectiveness of film showings to the vocabulary building of the respondents. So you can have 3 film showing. So for one group of respondents. So you need to measure the effectiveness of the 3 film showings with a single group of respondents. So that is single group design. So meaning the respondent is only a single group. Okay, I hope that is clear. So number 2 is 2 group designs, meaning there are 2 groups of respondents. So 2 comparable groups are employed as experimental and controlled. So for example, so I'm trying to fit the example to language studies because this video is dedicated to my language research students. So if you are listening to this and you are not a language research student, so I hope you can still understand with the use of my example. So the impact of phonic songs exposure to the language acquisition of toddlers in Lamacan, Argao, Cebu. So you will pick some respondents as your control group, and you will also pick respondents for your experimental group. So this control group, for example, respondent 1 to 10 and respondent 11 to 20. So they are grouped into 2. The 1 to 10 will not be exposed to phonic songs, but 11 to 20 will be exposed to phonic songs. So the control group, there is no treatment, no experimental treatment, but the experimental group, of course, from the word experimental group, they are being experimented with the exposure of phonic songs. So with that, you will try to see if there is an impact. So that one, you will use the t-test or the z-test for that to determine if there is a significant relationship between the phonic songs exposure and the language acquisition of the toddlers. Okay, next, number 3 is the 2-pair group design, meaning this design is an elaboration, expansion of the 2 group design, wherein there are 2 experimental groups and 2 control groups. So it is like the 2 group design being duplicated. So control groups, for example, again, the impact of phonic songs exposure to the language acquisition of toddlers in Lamacan, Argao, Cebu. So you choose respondent number 1 to 5 and respondent number 6 to 10 as your control groups, and then respondent 11 to 15 and respondent 16 to 20 as your experimental groups. So that is 2-pair group design. Next, we have parallel group design. So you will say parallel group experimental design. So how will you say it in your research? This research utilize a parallel group experimental design. So that one you will define what is parallel group experimental design. So this is a design in which 2 or more groups are used at the same time with only one single variable manipulated or changed, and then you have to justify why you choose this design. And of course, you need to understand first for you to justify. So example, let's understand this. Effectiveness of teaching language skills methods to the first year AB English students. So for example, our control groups, so two control groups and 2 experimental groups. So on 2 control groups, there will be no activities, no interventions, no experimental treatment. But the other two experimental groups is separated. First group is treated with reading activities, and the second group is treated with speaking activities. So it depends on your research questions whether you want to see if there is a significant difference between respondents being treated with reading activities and respondents with speaking activities. So like that. That is parallel group design or parallel group experimental design. And then number 5 is the pre-test, post-test design. This is very common in education research. And this design involves the experimental group and the control group, which are carefully selected through randomization procedures. So example of this, effectiveness of virtual language skills teaching to the first year AB English students. So I have here one control group, the traditional face-to-face. So we cannot conduct this as of the moment since we are not having a face-to-face class. So let's just try to imagine that we are in a normal setting, in the old normal, that there is a face-to-face classes and you experiment some of your students or some of your respondents with the virtual method. So you will both give them, or you will give both of the groups, both the control group and the experimental group with pre-test. So you will conduct a pre-test to all of them. And after, you will separate them. For the first group will have a face-to-face class. And the second group will go home and we will just have the virtual class. So with that, after 5 months, for example, you will gather them and then you will give the post test and you will try to see the difference if who is having a higher language skills, no? Who is having a higher proficiency in terms of language skills. Is it the experimental group or the control group? So that is pre-test and post-test experimental design. Okay, so next we have the counterbalance or Latin square design, and I usually know this as the quasi-experimental design. So this design is also called rotation design or quasi-experimental. So it involves an exchange of 2 or more treatments taken by the subjects during the experiment. So what I can imagine with this is a basketball where you call that round robin or rotation. So this team will play with other team. So let's say Lakers will play with, I'm not familiar with the other terms and other teams in basketball. So let's just call them team A, team B, team C, team D, and team E. So team A will play with team B, will play with team C, will play with team D, and so on. And team B will play also with all the other teams. So quasi-experimental is like that. So for example, in this study, effectiveness of language skills teaching methods to the first year AB English students. So let's have 3 methods. So the face-to-face, the virtual, and the blended face-to-face and virtual. So in order to determine what methods or what method is more effective among the 3, so we will use the quasi-experimental method. We also have here 3 instructors. So my formula here, M for for the method, an I for the instructor, and R for the respondents or the group of respondents. So method 1, instructor 1, respondents 1. Method 2, instructor 1, respondents 1, until all the instructors will be able to handle all groups of respondents, and until all groups of respondents will be able to encounter all types of methods, and until all the methods will be able to encounter all the instructors and all the respondents. So I hope you can get about the rotation. Just imagine about basketball where this team be must encounter all other teams. So just like that. Number 7, you have the complete randomized design. So this is a design in which a group of participants or subject is studied only once, but subsequent treatment is applied to determine the cause of change. So for example, effectiveness of virtual language skills teaching to the first year AB English students. So there is no control group here. We just have the experimental group, so the virtual method. So the effect of virtual method to the experimental group. So automatic, complete, randomized design, no control group, just the experimental. So direct, very direct. So next, we have number 8. This is the complete block design or randomized complete block design. So this experimental design uses a group of participants or subjects of the study which are studied once, but subsequent treatments applied are replicated to determine the cause of the change. So this is quite similar to the previous design, so the randomized, but this one is the treatment will be repeated and repeated or replicated in order to really see, just like when you try to touch a wet paint on the wall and say, oh, it's wet. Is it really wet? Let me try again. Yeah, it's really wet. So like that. So it's the same with randomized complete block design. So it will be conducted in a longer period of time, of course, because you need to determine, for example, for a virtual method, you need to see the performance of the students or the respondents in this semester, and in the next semester, the same method, virtual, is there an improvement, or is the result still the same? So when there is a contention or hypothesis by the researcher that the virtual method is more effective than the traditional method, so you need to see that in the first semester of 2020, yeah, accepted virtual method is better than the face-to-face. In the second semester, accepted better than the traditional. The first semester of 2021, yes, accepted. So if accepted is greater than, or the probability of having a positive result is greater than the negative, therefore that is more valid. So the more replication, the more valid the result is. So next, we have the correlational design. This is very common when you want to measure the relationship of the variables. So this experimental design is used to determine the relationship of two dependent X and Y on how they manipulated by the independent variable. So for example, impact of English movies exposure to the language proficiency of the first year AB English students in the academic year 2020 to 2021. So our independent variable here is the English movie exposure. So we will we will expose the respondents to the English movies, and we will try to see if their writing skills have improved and their speaking skills have also improved. So our two dependent variables here is the writing skills and the speaking skills. In your research question, you can say that is there a significant relationship between the English movies exposure of the respondents to the language skills of the respondents as to uh, 1.1 writing skills, 1.2 speaking skills. So there you can see your variables. So that's relational design. So you will say this research will utilize the relational experimental design. So, but remember, if you are not the one exposing them to the English movie, you cannot call that experimental. So that is descriptive because you are just letting them answer how long are they exposed to movies. So that's descriptive. That's descriptive survey. But if you really pick your respondents, enclose them in an area, and then expose them to English movies for a certain period of time, like 5 months, and then that's experimental. Do not be confused. So if you want to have, or if you want to have, to choose rather, if you want to choose an experimental design, then start as early as now for you to attain your goal in a short time frame. So that's why most of the undergraduate students will not choose experimental design, because this will really take time. But if you think that you can still cover up with this, and you can still manage to have the experiment until your research is due, then why not choose this design? If you think you can get an exact data within a certain time frame. So now you may start deciding on what to choose. Is it experimental? Is it historical? Or is it descriptive? But um, uh, be sure that the design that you will choose is, of course, uh, applicable to your time frame. So lastly, we have the case study. Again, this is the combination of the historical, the descriptive, and the experimental, because first you need to gather the history of the case. Then second, you need to observe the present of the case, and then you have to experiment or make an adjustment in order to resolve the case. So it is defined here as it is a problem solving technique that the study is described from past, present, and future. So this is a very clear examples I'm giving you. It's quite long for a PowerPoint presentation, but I really included this example for it to be clear for those who are not familiar with case study. So for instance, a researcher wishes to determine the reading difficulties of a child. He will collect data through interview, observation, schedule, and test. So interview, observation, schedule. Of course, you can do that through descriptive design. So test, you still part of the descriptive design. So he will analyze, or he analyzes the factors associated with reading difficulties, such as is it physical, intellectual, pedagogical, emotional, social, and environmental. So once he will discover, or he will come up with a result that uh, this is the factor of the difficulty, then he will have a remedial treatment for that. So for instance, emotional may be the problem. So he will apply a remedial adjustment measure to enhance the performance of in reading by giving positive reinforcements or by boosting the self-efficacy of the respondent. So maybe the respondents have the ability to read, or not, I mean respondent has. So I'm limiting the sampling. I'm assuming that he is studying only one respondent since this is a case study. So once he will discover that the emotional is the cause of the reading difficulty, then he will apply an adjustment measure, perhaps by giving again positive reinforcements or by encouraging the child. Maybe he lacks some moral support or encouragement or words of affirmation that he can do that. Okay, so when the remedial adjustment measure is being applied to the child or to the respondent, there should be a subsequent follow-up to ascertain the effectiveness of the corrective measure applied. So follow up and follow up, so it would really take time, and inferencing again is hard since sampling is limited to one. So it you can also have more than one as long as you can still thoroughly examine the case. Okay, so I hope that in this lecture video, you already now have the idea on what design to choose for your research. So if you think that your time frame is still enough for an experimental design, then much better. So you can also use descriptive study. But if you want also a detailed descriptions of the types of descriptive study or descriptive design, then just comment below so that I will be encouraged to have a separate lecture for that. Okay, so this is taking so long, so it's time to say goodbye, and I'll end this lecture video. So see you in my other lecture videos. Thank you for watching. If you have some questions, just comment down below, or just for my students, just message me. Okay, special thanks to all the people who made and released this awesome resources, presentation template by Slides Carnival, then photographs by Unsplash, and then of course my main source for this lecture is the research and test writing by Laurentina and Melchor Calmorin. Okay, bye and thank you. See my other lecture videos regarding research methodology.